Hello, welcome to episode 203 of the Epic Film Challenge 2, 1001 movies you must see before you die, An American Werewolf in London. We talked about The Wolfman, now we go to An American Werewolf in London. And now I thought this would be fun to kind of link two werewolf movies together, because in a lot of ways An American Werewolf in London is a loose remake of The Wolfman. But I didn't realise that it's actually referenced in this film, and he's like, you know, Lon Chaney Jr., the Wolfman, you know. So I was really pleased when I watched this and thought, oh, this really does tie in with, you know, the Wolfman in a lot of ways, and it really is a lot more similar than I remember. I first saw this film maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, and I'm glad I revisited it because I liked it very much when I first saw it, and I think I loved it now. Filmed by John Landis, who is a director who's had a varied career. One of my favourite films of all time at one point was The Blues Brothers, and I have an interesting relationship with that film, a good story for another time. But An American Werewolf in London is a typical John Landis film, I feel like, and it's a film that really has influenced a lot of people who are making great films today. Edgar Wright is a very outspoken fan of An American Werewolf in London. You can really see the DNA of An American Werewolf in London in films like Shaun of the Dead and so on. So it's cool to see like where that kind of thing starts to begin. I mean, this is very much tied to The Wolfman in terms of that story of someone who gets bitten by a wolf and becomes a werewolf, but doesn't really know if it's really happening to him. And I loved that idea. I loved how it was explored, and much like in The Wolfman, I like how they play with the idea of maybe he is just crazy. Maybe he isn't really literally turning into a wolf, but it's this psychosis, and I love that that was played with in this film, at least up to a certain point. I mean, there is a certain point where it becomes very clear what the truth is, but for a good portion of the film, at least 2/3 I think, you could really play around with the idea of, is it really happening? So I like that a lot. And we have a character called David, an American, David Kessler, played by David Naughton, and his friend Jack. David and Jack, they're two Americans on holiday, backpacking around Europe, and they're in northern England, of all places, on the moors, and they end up in a pub, and very typical English, British pub, but it's a very uncomfortable atmosphere. And right at the beginning of the film, Jack gets mauled by a wolf and David gets taken down too. And he wakes up in a hospital in London and starts getting visited by Jack's undead corpse. And this is where, you know, the film really gets funny. And to speak about the humour of the film, this very much is a horror comedy, but I feel like towards the end the comedy starts to fade just a little bit. But there's still, it really plays around with the conventions of what is a comedy and what is a horror film, because this film has some of the best horror effects you'll probably ever see. And it also has some of the most irreverent kind of humour in a horror, you know, film that you'll ever see as well, I think. And I think the tone is really set from the beginning of the film. And I forgot about this, but right at the beginning, 2 frames into the film, I started laughing out loud, because they opened the film up with shots of the moors and Blue Moon. I mean, it's just such an upbeat, chipper kind of song. And, you know, Lycanthrope Productions, it just clues you in right from the get-go. Like, you know, our tongue is firmly planted in our cheek with this film, and have a good time with it. And that's exactly what you do have with this film. But instead of just kind of making it really cheesy, they got someone like Rick Baker to do these incredible effects, practical effects, and they're not wasted either. They're really used well and used really conservatively. There's the famous sequence where David transforms into the werewolf, and it is this like gnarly, kind of just like achingly horrific scene. Like, you can feel the bones stretching and cracking as they're forming, and he's screaming, and so many different like layers of his, you know, face makeup and the body makeup, and it must have taken so long to put that, like, you know, 1 to 2 minute scene together. And then the great shot where his face is like a profile shot, and the face just kind of elongates out as the kind of wolf features stretch through the skull. And apparently Rick Baker, who did the makeup design for the creature and everything, he was really annoyed that he'd spent months on this kind of extending face thing, and it was only in the film for like 6 seconds. But once he saw it in a cinema and heard the reaction, he kind of realized that it really worked. And that's something I think that is key when you use stuff like that, is to really use it sparingly and don't kind of linger on it too long. And let that great moment of practical effect be there for long enough to kind of burn into the audience's memory and their brain, but not to leave it there too long. That's what I feel like the film does really well. There'll be these dream sequences, and even the wolf itself, you can tell they didn't have a great kind of moving animatronic or anything for the werewolf itself in its full form. So you do feel a few times like they're trying to work around it. You know, there's a scene where a werewolf, the werewolf is chasing a guy through the London Underground, and I love that scene when he's running through that like underground passageway, and you just see the camera following him and him reacting to it. Well, there's a shot where he's running through a different turning, and just the way the werewolf was running behind him, you would have seen him behind him, you know. So that kind of lets attention out a little bit. It kind of pulls the curtain back just a little bit too much for my liking, where it's like, you know, you kind of had the illusion going and you kind of let it slip a little bit. But there's not too many moments like that, and for the most part it really, really works. And just the loud kind of flashes of the werewolf, like, rah! You know, just like, it's edited really, really well. And Connie watched some of it with me. She wasn't too keen on revisiting this film, but she was there when I was watching the last half an hour, and whenever the werewolf would pop up and the growl would be so loud, she's like, oh no, too loud, too loud. I'm like, that's the point! It's supposed to proper get you. I mean, it's a jump scare in a way, but it isn't, because it's cutting to something. It's not someone walking through like a corridor and a hand comes out. It's this kind of smash cut jump scare where the sound of the primal roar of the werewolf is supposed to really take you aback. There's some crazy stuff in the film. You know, there's like the Nazi werewolf sequence is very strange and bizarre and violent and horrible. But yeah, I mean, the gore in the film is quite something. Apparently when they were restoring this film for Blu-ray release for this film, John Landis is quite taken aback by how gory it really was. Now the performances, David Naughton as David, I think is really good. I like him a lot in the film. He's really charming and believably kind of witty, you know. He has that kind of charm to him that doesn't feel forced, it feels natural. And I love the scene when he speaks to his sister in the phone booth. It's played really, really well. The guy who plays Jack is great, you know, a very sardonic kind of guy. He's got that sarcastic wit to him, and especially when his corpse, which whenever he visits David, you know, from beyond the grave and is wandering, you know, the world undead until the bloodline of the werewolf is severed, we see him kind of degrading, you know, like the slash across his face, and then like his skin starts to kind of mold, and then by the end he's just this kind of skull. And again, it's funny, when I was watching that last scene with Jack, and he's just this skull, and you can see the eyeballs are like coming out and stuff, and it must be pure animatronic at that point. Connie was like, oh, Thriller much? I was like, well, it turns out that Michael Jackson was a big fan of this film, and pretty much got everyone from this film to do the Thriller music video, from John Landis directing to, you know, the special effects, the makeup and everything. So yeah, it has a Thriller feeling to it, because that's what Michael Jackson got inspired by to do Thriller, which is kind of cool as well. And I really like Jenny Agutter, who plays Alex, the doctor, the nurse, I should say, who tends to David, and I love how their relationship progresses, and it feels really natural. And I like how when we first see her, she's in the nurse's uniform, you know, she's got her hair tied back, and she's got the outfit on very official. And then as their relationship continues and they start to kind of grow an attraction for each other, and she invites him to stay at her place, then we see her in normal street clothes and the hair comes down, and it's just, I like how the comfortability really flows well with that relationship. I don't know, and it just felt so believable. You know, this guy's clearly got something crazy going on in his head with his werewolf business, but she is really so charmed and attracted to him. You just really believe them falling in love with each other. I love the character of the doctor, who starts to investigate David's story, because David's like, look, I wasn't, you know, attacked by a wild, crazy man. I was attacked by a wolf. And the doctor's like, well, the reports say that it was a crazy man. He's like, well, I'm telling you it's not the case. So the doctor goes and investigates and stuff. And the doctor is played by, is it John Woodvine? I want to say, I had his name, yeah, John Woodvine. John Woodvine is my favourite actor of all time, who I've seen in two things only ever. You know, I need to see more of this guy. He was in Shameless, the UK drama series, years ago, at least 10 plus years ago. He appeared on, I think, the second series as Frank Gallagher's dad. He was so good in that show. I loved his episodes as Frank Gallagher's dad. That those two just played off each other so well, and I just will always associate him with that role as Frank Gallagher's dad. Like, he's just so brilliant, and it's cool to see him in this film. And I think he's just such a good actor. I just like the style, and maybe he's one of those actors who kind of just plays himself a lot, but I just really like his personality, I guess. And when he goes and investigates, it's really cool. And he goes back to that bar from the beginning of the film, the pub, and Brian Glover plays one of the I think it's Brian Glover plays one of the guys in the pub who's, you know, very insistent that no one knows about this werewolf business. Rick Mayall has a wordless part in, well, I think he has one line in the film, in the pub. One of my favourite British comedians who passed away a few years ago, sadly. Anyway, a lot of great British talent in this film, and John Woodvine really stood out to me. I really liked his character in the film a lot. He brought a nice weight to it, I think, and a different perspective as well, and also someone who was willing to look into David's story, but also to give that the audience and also Alex that kind of idea that, look, I think this is kind of a mass psychosis, you know. He thinks he's turning into a werewolf, but something is definitely wrong and we need to help him. The last, like, 10-15 minutes is absolute mayhem. Like, that whole set piece in Piccadilly Circus with the porno theatre, you know, and that scene where he gets to meet all the people he killed the night before, and that one woman's just like suggesting ways he can kill himself. Oh, you could drown yourself, like, in blood all over her face, like, so funny. But it and it gets crazy once he escapes from that porno theatre, and there's cars smashing into each other. It's like a mini Blues Brothers catastrophe right there. It almost goes Blues Brothers, but not quite. Didn't go full Blues Brothers with the car crash calamity sequence, but there's some pretty heavy moments of gore in that scene as well. But at the very end of the film, it's probably my biggest bugbear. I think that it's such a shift in tone from the last shot to the credits. You know, it's a very kind of quick, you know, and we're done. And you don't have the time to kind of really let what happened at the ending sink in too much. And it's like, oh, we're done, okay, yeah, how do you react, you know? And I guess that's part of it, that's part of the fun, I suppose, but I feel like the ending was done so earnestly, and it worked so well, that when you kind of jump into the credit sequence with the kind of, you know, the jaunty kind of music is a little bit jarring, and I don't think it really works 100%. But overall, I love this film. I don't know why it took me this long to rewatch it. It's certainly one to go back to more frequently than I have in the past. Again, it's about 4, 5, even 6 years since I last saw it. Almost every song in the film, I think, has the word moon in it. You know, it's very clever. It's very sharp and very funny without really being too over the top, you know. And I was thinking about, you know, the Edgar Wright influence and stuff. This isn't like a Shaun of the Dead film. If you haven't seen it, it isn't like a Shaun of the Dead where it's funny, 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 funny. There's gag after gag after gag, and it's really richly constructed as a comedy. This one has comedy throughout it, but it really does lean in on the horror aspect too, and I think that it has some genuinely affecting horror sequences, you know, with the maulings and so on. I think it's really well done. Again, the practical effects, the performances are all likable and believable. So yeah, that's about it. An American Werewolf in London, is it a film you should see before you die? Absolutely. I think this is one of those films that is so qualified for that term, because I think a lot of people would enjoy this. A lot of people wouldn't, but I think the success ratio is probably bigger than the failure ratio in terms of people watching this film and enjoying it, getting something out of it, getting some entertainment. This is just a pure entertainment kind of film, which I would highly recommend to anyone. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.